Okay, this will be part 2 of Nigeria institutions. Hope everybody is doing well. I miss you guys as always. And I was kind of telling the guys on office hours last week that this will be a lighter week in general. Nigeria it always kind of tends to be my shortest country. Yeah, so we're going to kind of ease up here and we'll get more into AP review after this week. All right, so Nigerian institutions say this will be just a general overview of the Nigerian government. We have this quote here: "The trouble with Nigeria is simply and squarely a failure of leadership. There is nothing basically wrong with the Nigerian character. There is nothing wrong with the Nigerian land or climate or water or air or anything else." So the problems that we've seen in Nigeria have been failures in leadership, and mostly Nigeria has just been characterized by a string of military coups, which have obviously given a very tumultuous history and helped and made them struggle to establish a democracy. That, and then you throw regionalism and those issues on top of it, and it becomes a very difficult situation. Okay, so basics about the Nigerian government. We do characterize it as a democracy, though it's a fragile democracy. It is a federal system. So the territory is divided into 36 federal states, and Abuja, the capital, which is in the middle of the country, is the federal capital. It's a presidential system, and again, it's a strong president here with a bicameral legislature. The issue and the reason why we have this asterisk here by federal is because checks and balances do not operate well. The president makes most decisions, and state and local governments, though in theory they have authority, are totally dependent upon the central government. And the central government divvies out resources and funding the way they see fit. So it functions much more like a unitary system. Okay, this is an old one. This is from 2015, but we have the election map. And this is significant because you can see the north-south division here. This is the characteristic that divides Nigeria the most, is this regional division, this regional cleavage, which also coincides with religious and ethnic cleavages as well. So the executive branch is, so these are the political parties, obviously. The executive is made up of the president and the president's cabinet. The president is directly elected to a 4-year term, can serve a 2-term limit. They use a two-round majority model, meaning you have to win a majority of votes, not just the most, but a majority to become the president. So the top 2 vote getters would go off to a runoff election when necessary. Now, this is the other thing that's interesting. The candidate must win a majority of votes cast in total across the country. And we get a little bit of, I think, electoral college ness here, because they must win 25% of votes cast in 2/3 of Nigeria's states. So the reason I say that's kind of like the electoral college is because the thinking here is we don't want one region to dominate. In other words, you can't win the presidency simply by gaining all your support in the north and none in the south. You have to at least get 25% of the votes in the south as well. Just like in the United States, you cannot focus just on the most populous states and to win the election because of the Electoral College. We have this system where we focus much more on swing states instead. So I just said this, but if no candidate wins a majority in the first round, the second round would pit the top 2 candidates against one another. Okay, so, and I did this too. Sorry, I gave you the answer. Why do you think Nigeria has the requirement of winning 25% of the votes cast in 2/3 of Nigeria's states to move to the second round? And they apparently did not include the answer. And again, it's to balance the regional divide within the country. I think I talked about in the first video yesterday, the capital of Abuja is in the center of the country and was moved there, like also as a way to balance out the country. Okay. Yeah, so a regional candidate. Oh, it is here. Sorry, guys, it's late. I'm kind of not with it at the moment. Okay. So regional candidate cannot win the presidency, and we're attempting to unify the people or country. Okay, here we go. This is Goodluck Jonathan, and he was a pretty popular president. He's no longer the president. The president now is Buhari, but this is I have him on here. He was a fairly popular president who was the predecessor to the current president. Okay, so the executive can appoint officials to all parts of the national government without any approval from the legislature. So again, functioning much more like, authoritarian, more unitary system. Leads to something called patrimonialism, which is a term that functions in other places, but certainly functions here in Nigeria. System of patronage where the president is at the top. So patronage we've talked about before, it's a system of rewards, and if you kind of do favors for the government, they will reward you with positions, and that's how leadership positions are chosen within the Nigerian system. So you just have to kind of get on his good side. There's nobody that is going to hold him accountable for the decisions for who he appoints to these positions. The executive also is in charge of the country's oil. Nigeria is highly dependent upon oil, receives all funding and all money from, the sale of oil, and distributes that to the states. It's as directed by law, but also sort of is directed, as they see fit. The president, not surprisingly, is the commander of the armed forces and can veto any laws passed by the legislature. So this is the current president, Buhari, and again, this was Goodluck Jonathan, his predecessor. Buhari, just a little background on him. He is a former military dictator. He's 70. Actually, he's older than that now, probably, because I updated this last year, so he's probably 73. So 73-year-old Muslim former military dictator now leading the country. And that is very common for Nigeria, for military dictatorships, military leaders to be leading the country. Okay. The bureaucracy, because it's made up of people appointed by the president who are not checked by the legislature, we see issues of corruption. The fact that it says bloated, that means, people are benefiting from the system. It's full of people directly connected to the president, and also seen as very inefficient. Just like in Mexico, Nigeria has a parastatal sector, so companies that are theoretically privately owned, but they're run by government appointees. And they manage most of the public utilities in Nigeria, water, electricity, etc. So, the idea here, it's supposed to give the appearance of cooperation between the public and private sectors. Really, though, because the government is controlling these sectors, the state maintains control over these industries. The legislature was primarily parliamentary. I talked about the fact that they used a system from Great Britain that didn't work so well in Nigeria. And now they have a bicameral legislature called the National Assembly with senators and representatives. All of them serve 4-year terms. They are elected at the same time or the week before the president. So the Senate consists of 109 members, 3 from each state and 1 from Abuja. They tend to be very diverse because all regions, no matter the diversity, are equally represented. So very similar to our Senate. And then the House of Representatives has 360 members. A drawback for Nigeria is that it has one of the lowest rates of female representation in the legislature in the world. The House in general has very little power. Does try to check the president. There have been times when the president has tried to seek a 3rd term and tried to change the Constitution, and the House of Representatives actually held him accountable and prevented that from happening. There are lower level courts. We have state courts and federal courts. So again, this is in a lot of ways similar to what happens in the United States. And they also have an appeals process that starts at the local courts, or the lower courts, I should say, and work their way up to the Supreme Court. Immediately after Nigeria gained independence, the courts were very strong and autonomous. Military rule has limited their effect. So most judges today are not very well trained, which means they're easily manipulated, mostly by the president. Theoretically, they're in charge of judicial review, but practically that doesn't exist. And again, that's something we've seen in a lot of our countries where judicial review exists on paper, but not in practice. And then, of course, the law becomes very complicated because in the north and the Muslim parts of the country, Sharia law is in operation. That's that is controversial there. It's not something that is the codified law, but that is what's practiced in the northern parts of the country, and that would make it very difficult on the judiciary to carry out its decisions and to make decisions. Nigeria has a strong military. One of the things about the military is that it is one of the best opportunities for young Nigerians to improve their lives, to move up, to gain access to government positions. And it is widely recognized as the national institution with the most likely capability to restore and maintain order in the country. Let's talk a little bit about linkage institutions, the political parties in Nigeria. As you might imagine, they are all regionally and ethnically based, so they tend to shift from election to election and enjoy regional support. So some of the ones that are popular are listed here. It is a multi-party system. And again, like I said, it tends to depend on the election. So the parties tend to appear and disappear based on leaders. So they tend to coalesce around popular leaders. All right. Wow, got fancy here. Okay, so some recent parties that have experienced success include the People's Democratic Party. This is the most long-lasting party that produced President Obasanjo and Goodluck Jonathan. This tends to have support in the north. It's a coalition of northern and Yoruba politicians, military leaders, and some smaller ethnic groups in the middle of the country. Another one would be the All Progressives Congress. In 2013, three opposition parties came together to challenge the PDP in 2015, and that led to Buhari's election. So, not that the party is, held together by some very concise ideology. What they have in common is opposition to the PDP. Okay. Because of that 1999 constitutional requirement that says that you have to have 25% support from, at least 25% of support from all the states, the parties are having to get strategic and pool tickets of people together that will gain influence in different parts of the country. So you can think of this, the same way our presidential candidates sometimes consider region for their vice presidential picks. They want to pick up somebody who's going to gain support from a part of the country that they may not carry. So it's the same idea here. They're going to form a ticket, a slate of candidates to run together to represent different groups from across the country. Okay. So civil society is fairly strong in Nigeria. They do play a role in Nigerian politics. And just like in the United States and in other countries that we've seen, they're broken down along various sectors. We have some interest groups based on religion, some based on professions of the educated elite. Labor unions have regained some power in recent years. So this just lists out for you some of the more significant interest groups. The AP test is never going to ask you to name a specific Nigerian interest groups, but this just kind of shows you what it looks like. You have interest groups based on, the Christian Association, several Muslim associations. I think of the United States here as well. We have educational institutions, physicians, legal professions joining together to advocate for their needs. And then the labor unions, just like in the United States, are fairly powerful here. Okay. The media is well developed. It's independent. Maybe surprising considering how strong the president is, how much control the president has. The media reflects ethnic interest in issues within the country. Wow. I made this really fancy whenever I made it. Okay. In terms of the effects. Do you need to see that again? Wow. Okay. Great. So the TV and newspapers, not surprisingly, are more common in urban areas of the country, and there is that rural-urban divide in Nigeria as well. The parastatals, so again, they are owned by government or run by government officials, own 100 stations. But there are many privately owned TV stations, cable, and satellite services. I think this is an interesting, fact. I think I got this from good old Ethelwood. Radio reaches all of Nigeria. All 36 states have their own and compete with private broadcasters. So we do have sponsored radio there.